Hello YouTube and welcome back to the channel. Right now I'm currently live on Twitch at twitch.tv/jib_Yugioh, and we are going to be doing a tier list for the September 2024 Banlist season or format. This format is only going to last about a month. There's only a couple of events in this format, mainly YCS Lille and YCS Chile. And then we're going to be getting Rage of the Abyss in October for YCS Niagara. That will change the format. So here we have our different tiers and we have different decks that are in the format. If I miss your favorite deck, sorry. But we have most of, if not all, of the important decks that we need to talk about on this list here. So I'm just going to do it in the order that is presented. And we are going to start with the first deck being Tenpai Dragon. So on this latest ban list, Tenpai Dragon got two big hits, one being the Sengen Summoning going to 1, which is the field spell, which is the most important card in the deck, is the most broken card in the deck. It protects all of your fire dragons during the main phase, so it basically allows you to set up for perfect battle phases, either by summoning Super Transcendent in the main phase, Black Rosing your opponent unaffected, or just spamming the board with bodies. And then secondly, Pot of Prosperity going to 1 is also a big hit for this deck. It's the one of the main consistency points of the deck. The deck doesn't have a ton of great engine, and Prosperity is also helping you see your board breaker cards when you're going second. Cards like Regeki, Dark Hole, Lightning Storm, Duster. So Prosperity going to 1 is a big hit. And for the time being, Rage of the Abyss, because in Rage of the Abyss, Tenpai does get some new tools that I think will push it back up. I think that Tenpai is a safe 1.5 at the moment. I think that the deck is still good. It's still a budget option that players will use, and it still has Dimensional Shifter, which is one of the best cards in the game. But with the consistency hits, I think for the time being is going to be a little bit lower in power level than where we'd like it to be. And when compared to some of the other decks, I think that is not in the tier 1 spot that it was in before. The next deck here is Labyrinth. I would say that Labyrinth is also probably a tier 1.5 deck. I think that Lab had a very good Snake Eye matchup. The Yubel matchup was a little bit worse, but I think that cards like Equation Cannon are still good. Daruma Cannon are still good. This deck can also play cards like Lava Golem and Spear Mode, which are probably a little bit better this format. So yeah, a Trap Labyrinth deck I think is still a pretty solid option. However, I do think that playing a deck like this, you're kind of just hoping that you don't run into players that are prepared for back row. Obviously, Labyrinth is still very weak to cards like Ash Blossom, Ghost Bell, which isn't seeing too much play, but mainly Ash Blossom. And like, you know, when you go into a tournament, half of the room is going to have cards like Cosmic Cyclone, Lightning Storm, and Duster in their side deck because they just feel like they have to respect back row. And decks like Labyrinth and other trap decks try to take advantage from the better players, opting not to play those type of cards in order to make concessions for matchups that they feel are more relevant and require more care in the side deck. So decks like Trap Lab, decks like Runic Sun take advantage of that, but they're very weak to players who are building their side decks to be as what's the correct word? To be as generic as possible. Yeah, so I think it's a solid 1.5 deck. Next is Sprite. I would say that Sprite is probably a tier 3 deck, sadly. And that's not to say that it's unplayable. I think that Sprite is okay. I think that Sprite is very weak to Molchummy, which is a card that is seemingly in a lot of people's side decks and will continue to see play. Sprite does have a few things going for it. It can play Dimensional Shifter, which is very cool. It has a good amount of room for non-engine. But I just think that where we are at in the format, a deck like Sprite, especially with its hits on the ban list, no Elf, no Ronin, is just not the best deck at the moment to play. But if you like Sprite, it's definitely playable. I'll save this one for later because this is like I'll probably save that one for last. We'll talk about that later. The next deck is Branded Despia. I would say that Branded Despia is a tier 1.5 deck right now. Branded Fusion to 1, lowering the consistency of hard opening Branded a little bit. Everything else in Branded is unhit. Sanctifier still around. Gimmick Puppet is still around. The deck was already playing 50 cards to 60 cards, so you weren't opening Branded Fusion that often anyways. And you still have all the access to Branded Fusion, whether it be Thrust, opening into Albaz, your Granganol, Sarinair setups. You still have infinite access to get the Branded Fusion into your hand and recur it for multiple turns. So I think that Branded is still a very solid option. The next deck is Melodious. I would say that Melodious is probably a tier 2 deck at the moment. I think that Melodious obviously didn't get any hits on the ban list other than Prosperity, which is a consistency hit to the deck, and it's a card that I think the deck needed. All the like tier 2 decks, even a lot of the tier 1.5 decks, used Prosperity as like a 3 of consistency all around the board, and Prosperity getting hit to 1 is a big hit to decks like Melodious' consistency. Melodious still has access to some of the best hand traps in the game, being Herald of Orange Light and Dominus Purge, which I think Dominus Purge in particular is very good this format because of the top deck that we'll talk about being very good. And it's a deck that can play Dominus Purge, so I think that makes it a little bit better than some of the other decks that will be below it. However, the end board when you go first isn't very good in this deck. It's pretty fragile, and if players are opting to play Board Breaker, which is what some people are talking about, playing Board Breakers instead of hand traps, I think that Melodious gets a lot worse. The next deck is Tearlament, Lightsworn, Horus, Danger, Pal. So basically just like a mill combo Pal. I don't know whether this would play Grass or not. I don't think you'd want to play Grass. Even though Grass is a very powerful card, it's at 1. You should still keep that in mind. So I don't think we're in a position where we would want to build our deck around a 1 of. So I would say that it is probably a tier 3 deck. Decks like these usually can't go second. Decks like these, okay, I won't say that they usually can't go second. I would say decks like these usually thrive in a format where you're able to go second without hand traps or board breakers. When you're able to just open 5 engine cards and break boards, which we've had formats like that in the past where decks were powerful enough. Like if you guys remember during the Rescue Ace Unchained tier format, because tier was a prominent deck during that format. I believe it won a YCS during that format. Or got second. It might have won. I don't remember exactly if it won or got second, but tier was one of the best decks because tier can go second into a Rescue Ace board and break it. Given they had Agito and Kelbeck still, but yeah, when your engine is good enough to go second and just break into a board, then decks like Tearlament are very, very good. The next deck is Voiceless Voice. I would say Voiceless Voice is another tier 3 deck. I think of Voiceless Voice as like it's definitely just a worse fairy deck or a worse Dominus Purge deck than Melodious. Melodious just has better engine. Voiceless Voice plays a lot of bricks. It was already kind of inconsistent because it was a ritual deck, but now with Prosperity being to 1, it loses 2 more consistency cards. So I don't think that that's very good for Voiceless Voice. Also, cards like Droll and Lockbird are expected to see more play during this next format, and Board Breakers, which this deck is also weak to Board Breakers. So I just don't think that Voiceless Voice is the correct deck to play if you wanted to play like a Dominus Purge deck. The next deck is Kashtira. I would say that Kashtira is a tier 2 deck. It's a shifter deck. It can play Board Breakers. It can play hand traps. It's fairly consistent. Obviously, Prosperity went to 1, but all of the other Kashtira pieces are at 3. They still have 3 Planet, 3 Unicorn, 3 Fenrir, Terraforming. You probably play Chicken Game, and you can play Shifter. I think Shifter is probably what's stopping it from being like down here tier 3. I think the engine is better than these in the current format, and obviously Shifter is just a complete blowout card. The next deck is Gimmick Puppet. I would say that Gimmick Puppet is definitely a tier 3 deck. I think the hits to Gimmick Puppet were very good. I thought that the OCG hit of just limiting strings to 1 was already enough to make the deck kind of suspect and lower the consistency of the FTK a fair bit. But with dark strings at 1 also, I think a lot of your lines to FTK through hand traps or your opponent nibbing themselves are very limited, and your deck is way weaker to Bistils now. Because Bistils were already good against your deck on your Fantastic Machinex, but now if your opponent is able to Bistil your dark string out the graveyard, I think the game is over. I think you lose. The next deck is Dragon Link. Like and subscribe, guys. But no, on a serious note, I don't think that Dragon Link has anything going for it. I don't see a reason to play Dragon Link over any other deck on this list unless you just like Dragon Link. Um, Dragon Link lost Dragon Link lost Borlord Fierce Dragon. It lost Baron. It lost Appaloosa. It lost a lot of its go first options, and it's basically just been reduced to a Bishtil control deck. And a deck like that is very format dependent. It really depends on what everything else around it is doing and how good Bistils are. And even when Bistils are good, like last format, they're just better engines to house Bistils than a Dragon Link deck. So yeah. The next deck is Drytron. This is a deck that I kind of want to experiment with a little bit more. It kind of goes into that category of combo decks that are really good when you're able to go second and break boards with engine. Appaloosa did get banned, which was Drytron's worst enemy of all time, is probably Appaloosa. Back to even the Tri-Brigade format, that's what really held Drytron back, was Tri-Brigade's ability to just set up Appaloosa. And Appaloosa did just get banned, and we got back Eva, which is crazy support for Drytron. Everything is at 3. The deck is pretty much at full power. And it received more support. So you would think that the deck would be a lot better. However, Drytron cannot really go second in this format right now. Also, when Drytron was super relevant, there were no Bistils in the game. Bistils are insane against Drytron. Also, Dimensional Shifter is a very important card right now. So I don't think that Drytron is in a position to do well, but that could change in the future. Maybe in the future Drytron can move up on the tier list depending on what everything else is going on. The next deck is Floowandereeze. I would say that Floowandereeze, even though I hate this deck with all my soul, it's probably my least favorite deck ever printed. I would say that Floowandereeze is probably tier 2 right now. Yes, Prosperity went to 1, but this deck can just as easily play Extravagance, which isn't a 1-to-1 replacement, is a way worse card than Prosperity. Prosperity is guaranteed, where cards like Desires and Extravagance are random. But Shifter, still a broken card, one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the game. This deck also has room for a fair amount of non-engine. It plays Board Breakers, which I think are going to be pretty good right now, and obviously Harpy's Featherstorm is an insane card. So I think that Flunder is fine. I would never touch this deck, but I think that it will do good in these little pocket formats. The next deck is Vanquish Soul. Is definitely not good. This deck is not it. I know people crap on this deck a lot, but I just don't think that this deck is very good. The best thing that this deck has going for it is Shifter, and when you Shifter yourself, like, you don't do anything. Like, you just make rock, maybe draw a card and pass. This deck is just like too low ceiling for where Yu-Gi-Oh is right now. The next deck is Salamangreat. I think that Salamangreat low key is probably a tier 2 deck right now, and I know that sounds crazy, but Salamangreat is probably one of the best decks that can use Promethean other than the Snake Eye Fire King strategy, and it also isn't necessarily weak to cards like Droll and Lockbird. So I think that that's really good, and it also has ways to deal with Board Breakers, because you have Rage and you have Roar. I think the deck is fine, and it has room for a lot of non-engine. So I think that Salamangreat is actually not too bad right now, and Salamangreat has already seen some revitalization and some experimentation over the last couple of formats, especially right before Snake Eye came out. Like, Salad was starting to do a little bit with the new support, and I think that it will continue to be around that tier 2 area. The next deck is Pearly. I would also put Pearly in the tier 2 category. I think that Pearly is one of those decks that's just like, it thrives in the formats in between sets where we get Banlist that hit everything down a ceiling, and then Pearly is able to just work in those formats and do what Pearly does, play cards like Shifter and just Board Breakers. Yeah, so I think Pearly is good for now, but obviously when the format ceiling raises, when we get new support and new cards, then Pearly gets a lot worse. So yeah. The next deck is Fiendsmith Yubel. This is the best deck of the format. I don't think it's very close, honestly. I don't want to say it's not a tier 0 deck. That's why, even though I don't think that is very close, I don't think that Fiendsmith Yubel is a tier 0 deck, because Fiendsmith Yubel, while it's the best deck going first by far, and the boards are almost unbreakable, the deck is not very good going second. Like a lot of the decks, even down to like the tier 3 area, and even down here, if they set up their go first board, Yubel has struggles to break their boards without board breakers, and the deck can't really play a lot of hand traps. So when Yubel goes second, most of the other decks on this list can beat it. So, which is different than Snake Eye, where Snake Eye had room for 18 non-engine, so they were stopping you from playing, and then their 1 to 2 cards can beat your 2 non-engine that you have left over, or if your deck doesn't have enough room to play a lot of non-engine, you only have 1, like you just auto lose. Like Yubel is very different in the sense that it can't go second very well. So, that's how I feel about Yubel. The next is Whitewood Runic. I would say that Whitewood Runic is a tier 1.5 deck. This is the deck that I really want to look into. I love Runic cards. A lot like Josh, I do love me some Runic cards. I played Runic live tune for the 2023 Nationals, and I loved it. It was one of the most fun times I've had playing a Yu-Gi-Oh event was with Runic cards. And I love the Whitewood cards because I love the Diabellstar lore. I think that they're really neat cards. Obviously, skill drain to 1 I think is a big hit for the deck. I felt like the deck relied a lot on skill drain to break boards when it went second, because you were able to just like set up your skill drain and like have Runic cards in order to push it through a Desiree, and then you just stun them with skill drain. But now that skill drain's at 1, I think that that's a good hit for the deck, and it kind of puts it in a weird position. But I do think that the deck is still very, very good, and I think Runic cards thrive in these weird in-between formats. I keep on saying in-between formats because we are in between sets, where we're done with the national season, we're beginning the new season, but Rage of the Abyss and Crossover Breakers is right around the corner, and both 2 of those sets give us new cards that will shake up the tier list completely, that we'll talk about in the coming months. But in these weird in-between formats, Runic cards are very good, and then when the format is settled, Runic cards usually come back at the end of the format once everything is kind of figured out. Yeah, I think that Runic Whitewood is pretty good. The next deck is Fire King Snake Eye. I would say that Fire King Snake Eye is probably... I would honestly put it in the tier 1.5 category. I don't think it's better than Branded. The hits to the Snake Eye engine are a really big deal for Fire King at the moment, until we get the Fire King Queen Unustrix, or the level 4 basically. It's an import that we haven't gotten yet, and once that card comes out, I think that Fire King Snake Eye can be up here with Yubel, because you can focus more on the Fire King cards, tone down a lot less on the Snake Eye cards, and you can have a competent deck. But at the moment, Fire King cards are extenders in the Snake Eye deck. They don't really give you many more starters. Like, I don't consider Ponix a starter because it's not really completing your full engine, where with the Unustrix, cards like Ponix, cards like Island, Unustrix itself are more starters for the deck. So Snake Eye Fire King is just a higher ceiling version of the Snake Eye deck that just has a complete end board, where some of the other Snake Eye versions don't have a complete end board at the moment, in my opinion. Whitewood Toy, terrible. Whitewood Centurion, terrible. These decks are not good. I think the Runic version is the best version of the deck. The next deck is Runic Stun. I would say that Runic Stun is also probably a tier 1.5 deck. If you guys already noticed, there's a lot of decks that I'm putting in tier 1.5, because I honestly feel like this is going to be, at least for this month or so, the format is going to be very diverse. I expect at YC's Lil, the best deck being Yubel to not take more than 25 to 30%. And there to be a lot of different decks in the top cut. I'm expecting at least 10 to maybe 15 different decks in the top cut, honestly, because it's not the format is very low ceiling except for Yubel, and Yubel has issues, so it can't secure very high amounts of conversion, in my opinion. But yeah, Runic Stun, everyone hates this deck. But it's solid, right? Like, skill drain went to 1, so all of the floodgates in the deck are at 1, but there are other cards that you can replace it. I know that Aaron McKinnon, he topped YCS Riley. I believe he was playing Tyrant Tantrum. That's like a card that can help try to replace the skill drains, or Power Sink Stone. There's a lot of floodgates that aren't seeing play right now because skill drain was at 3, but maybe we could just find room for new floodgates, right? But yeah, Runic Stun. The next deck is Ritual Beast. I would say that I think that Ritual Beast probably goes down in the tier 1.5. I think that Ritual Beast is actually pretty solid. I would say that it is one of the best shifter decks at the moment. Am I very good at this deck? No, but this deck can play shifter. It can play a good amount of non-engine. The end board when you go first is very good. It plays Protos. I think that Ritual Beast is actually like not bad right now. And I'm telling you, this tier list looks crazy because it's a lot of decks like that are being praised right now. But this is what happens when we get a big ban list that annihilates like a tier 0 deck or a deck that has such a grasp over the format. It opens the doors for a lot of other decks in order to see some play. And I think that no deck, like any of the decks from like tier 2 up, you can bring to the next YCS or your next event and probably have success with it. Because I don't think that any one deck is too dominant in what it does. The next deck is Memento Fiendsmith. I would say that Memento Fiendsmith is probably the other deck that I would put in tier 1. I think that Memento is probably the second best deck right now, even though I don't think a lot of people will play it. But I think that this deck is very strong. It's very underrated, and it's the deck that I'm probably gonna be playing for the next month or so. I have to learn it. I don't know how to play it. I know how to play Yugioh pretty well. But Memento is something that I really want to look into. I think that is heavily underrated, and I think it's very good. Like, it was good last format, and no one was playing it. But I think that with the Fiendsmith and the hit to Snake Eye, I think that this deck has big potential. Another deck that I think has huge potential is Fiendsmith Chimera. I think that Fiendsmith Chimera, another deck I would put in the tier 1 category. Actually, I think we should fix... Wait, hold up. I think we need to fix this tier. Let's give me a second. We can add one row below. Call it tier 1. Yep. So I think we call this tier 1. We just call this Yugioh. I think this is better, honestly. Okay, I think this is better. So Yugioh is the best deck, but it's very close in my opinion, because I don't think that these decks are on the same level as Yugioh, but Yugioh is not tier 0. Yugioh is not tier 0. I do not want you guys to get that from this. I'm not saying Yugioh is tier 0, even though it's better than everything else, because it's not good at going second. So you can play a lot of the other decks on this list and still do well. But I don't think that these decks are on the same level as Yugioh. But I do think that these Fiendsmith decks are very good. I think that these decks should see a lot of experimentation. If you guys don't know what these decks do, I'd familiarize yourselves with them, because I can see any one of these decks, honestly, from like tier 1.5, even tier 2 to Yugioh, I think could win the next YCS. But I think that these two decks are something that I would look out for. The next deck is Unchained Fiendsmith. I'd put Unchained Fiendsmith. It's funny, I've been praising these decks, but I would honestly put Unchained Fiendsmith in probably like the tier 2 area. I think that Unchained Fiendsmith is just a worse version of Yugioh. I don't think that there's a reason to really play Unchained Fiendsmith compared to Yugioh. I don't think that either are very good going second. I think that Shavara to 1 hurts pure Unchained a lot, where in Yugioh you would only really play one. I just think that it's a worse deck all around compared to a Yugioh deck, and I just don't think it's that great. I don't think it's very well positioned in the format. It can't play a lot of non-injury, etc., etc. The next deck is Rescue Ace Snake Eye, or yeah, Rescue Ace. Rescue Ace, again, another deck I'd put in tier 2. This deck is hit to hell. I think hitting the Snake Eye engine hurts this deck a lot, especially the Poplar hit. I feel like the Poplar hit is very big, and the Prosperity hit is very big. Again, attacking this deck's consistency. Also, hitting Beatrice makes it so that Fiendsmith is no longer a starter in this deck in order to get you to your Rescue Ace engine. So I think that this deck is hit to hell. I still think that it's okay. The Rescue Ace cards, when you are doing your combos, it's fine. But again, it's just not very well positioned. Also, this deck has a lot of bricks. Again, not a lot of non-injured. The next deck is Infernoid. I would put Infernoid in the tier 3 area. I just think that this deck plays infinite bricks, and I think one grass isn't enough to make the deck playable, in my opinion. The next deck is Pendulums. Sadly, I think Pendulums is terrible. I think Pendulums can't be good again. I think it would have to be like a perfect storm. I think we would need to get Electromite back, Astrograph at 3, and like new Pendulum cards, to be honest, in order for Pendulums to ever come back. Like Dimensional Barrier is a card. Pendulum is at least 3 card combos. If you do anything less, you're losing to every hand trap. It's a mess, right? So yeah, I don't think Pendulums is that great. The next deck is Plants. I would put Plants in the 1.5. I think that Plants is pretty good. I wouldn't put it higher than that. I would say that Plants is pretty good. Another deck that doesn't see much play here in NA, but I think that is solid. It has a lot going for it. It's weak to draw though, which these decks are kind of weak to draw a lot. All the Fiendsmith decks are weak to draw, but Chimera is very weak to draw. The Snake Eye decks are also kind of weak to draw, etc., etc. The next deck is Magical Musketeer. Fiendsmith, this deck was kind of just a hard counter to Fiendsmith Snake Eye from last format, and it didn't even do that very well. It wasn't consistent. It didn't have many results. So I would put it in probably a tier 2 area, because I think the Magical Musket cards are still probably pretty strong, and you could it probably could still do well, but I wouldn't put it too high. And now for the deck that we've all been waiting for me to talk about, and it is not pure Snake Eye, Fiendsmith Snake Eye. Snake Eye pure for all intents and purposes. The hits to this deck actually like hurt this deck crazy. This deck went from like, and I would suggest that you guys check out a video from Steven Santoli. He dropped a video today. It was an amazing video. Definitely go show him some love. He's an amazing player in NA, in the world, and he talked about the effects of the Banlist on the Snake Eye Fiendsmith deck, and how people are hyping up the Fiendsmith Snake Eye deck to be something that it's not, which is good because the deck is not good. I've been testing the deck for the last 2 days, and I'm telling you, the deck it's not good. The end board is worse. You go from 18 starters to 12 starters. You're not opening 2 card combos consistently. A lot of your extenders from last format, like Witch, are now forced to be starters because you just don't have enough engine. Fiendsmith doesn't bridge Snake Eye cards anymore. I would say, in all honesty, I would put Snake Eye Fiendsmith I'd put Snake Eye Fiendsmith at the top of tier 2. I think that it's like in this category of deck that is like, if it pops off, it can like pop off on you, but it's not like good. It's not something I would really bring to an event. Someone in chat said, how did the deck lose 6 starters? You lost 2 Snake Eye Ash, Poplar, and 3 Fiendsmith. Because Fiendsmith is not a starter anymore. So, like, Fiendsmith doesn't bridge Snake Eye cards. Like, I don't even think you're supposed to play Fiendsmith cards in Snake Eye anymore. I don't know if you're supposed to. They don't get you to Snake Eye cards. They're just like some other thing in the deck now. It's very weird. It's like Kashtira cards that take extra deck slots. It's very weird. But yeah, this is how I feel about this little in-between format at the moment. Definitely make sure to like and subscribe for more content. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.